it's Mrs. Simpson, and I'm going to go through an example of writing a personal narrative short essay. Or, you could also talk about it being a personal narrative story. So, first, let's start out by talking what a personal narrative seeks to do. So, personal means you're writing about something that happened to you. Narrative means you're telling the story with a beginning, middle, and end of that event, as well as explaining what you learned from it. So the first prompt that we're going to be doing together is to write about a time in which you encountered a culture with which you weren't familiar. And what I've done is, because this is a new skill for a lot of you, or you've gotten a little rusty because we were out of school for a while for summer, I've gone ahead and created a rough draft writing form, which is what you're seeing on your screen right now. If you go through this systematically, making sure that you follow all the directions, you'll have a really solid rough draft when you're done. I'm going to go through and do an example personal narrative. I've never written this one before, so I'm going to talk you through what I'm thinking and doing as I complete the assignment. All right, so first I want to look at my directions. It says, use the organizer below to write a rough draft of your personal narrative writing in response to the prompt above. So once again, let's check that prompt and make sure we know what we're writing about. Write about a time in which you encountered a culture with which you weren't familiar. So somebody who lives differently than you, maybe they ate different food than I ate, maybe they speak a different language than I speak, maybe they go to a different church than I do, maybe they're a different race or socioeconomic class. All of those are going to be cultural differences that we can have with other people. So that should give you some idea of the sorts of things you're going to write about. So as we write, we want to pay attention to the following. We do want to use I and me when we're writing a personal narrative. It's a personal narrative. You should use I and me in this type of writing. Sometimes when you do academic writing, we'll ask you to avoid using personal pronouns, but this is a time where we want you to use them. As I type, I want to make sure that even when I'm doing my rough draft, I'm using complete sentences that have a subject and a verb in them. I want to make sure that I start all of my sentences with a capital letter. I want to make sure I end all of my sentences with punctuation. Periods are going to be what you're going to be ending with. Make sure you capitalize I throughout. It's a simple thing to proofread for, but a lot of students don't do it. And I want to make sure I'm using descriptive words and the correct meaning. But honestly, that's something I can do when I go back to edit my rough draft. So this organizer will create a one-paragraph response if you write 1 or 2 sentences per section. And the expectation for this assignment is that you'll write about 1 paragraph. A paragraph is going to have a minimum of 5 sentences, but paragraphs can have more than that. Okay, so what I've done is I've gone ahead and I've kind of given you some directions for each part of the assignment. You're going to see that I've given the directions in blue, and then there are sections that say type here. The type here parts are going to show up in black typeface, and I'm going to show you why that's going to work out really nicely for you in a minute here. So the first part of my personal narrative is the exposition. This is the background information that the reader needs to know to understand the story I want to tell. So I have to describe the setting, and then I have to introduce the characters. That's who's involved in the story. So we don't have to be super complicated for this particular prompt. I've decided I'm going to write about something that happened with my 5th grade teacher, Mrs. Hayes. So when I was in the 5th grade, my teacher, Mrs. Hayes, was very strict. I'm going to describe her a little bit. And notice I'm taking my characters and setting and just sort of mushing them together. So I've talked about the setting. The time in history was when I was in the 5th grade. I'm starting to introduce the characters. Mrs. Hayes, my teacher. Okay, so I'm going to go on and give a little bit more background information because right now I haven't really told you what thing in 5th grade I'm going to write about. We were getting ready, ready to take state tests and tests. Okay, so I think actually that's enough because I'm going to go on and I'm going to include some more information. But let's see if I've given enough background information that this makes sense. So I was in the 5th grade. That's the time in history. The character was Mrs. Hayes, my teacher. Additional background information you need to know so you understand the story I'm going to tell. We're getting ready to take state tests. That's kind of part of our setting. All right, so I think this is good for now because really I'm just writing a short narrative. And I could have put some of this down here with the characters, but I like putting it all together. So I'm going to go down to the next section. This is our rising action. It says, explain the first thing that happened that created conflict and started to lead you towards the climax of your story. So this is not the most exciting part of the story. This is the stuff that happens along the way that creates some tension and conflict that's going to eventually lead us to the most exciting part of the story. So I've given the part about how we're getting ready to take state tests, and now I need to give you some more information. Mrs. Hayes told us all to fill out our bubble sheets with our demographic information. And what that means, if you don't know what demographic information is, it's like your name and your address and your race and all of that kind of stuff. Every time you guys take a test, you have to do that. So the bubble sheets with our demographic information. When it was time to mark my race, I penciled in. Notice I'm using some descriptive words. I'm not just saying the same thing over. Penciled is better than just saying wrote or marked. It's a little more descriptive. I penciled in the bubble next to white. Mrs. Hayes collected the sheets from all of us. She looked at my sheet for a long time. And I think actually I need to go back and maybe add some more things about her character. So as you're writing, that's going to be part of that writing process. So I think it's actually important to mention that she was Native American. So my teacher, Mrs. Hayes, was very strict. She was proud of her Native American, this is important to my story, heritage, and always wore beautiful beaded clips in her long black and gray hair. Okay, so I gave a little more information about her. This is going to be actually important. And guys, that's okay. If you don't get everything the first time, this is a rough draft. Go back and add things. Don't think that just because, oh, I'm finished with that section, I'm not going back. That's silly. So I added more information. Okay, so she looked at my sheet for a long time. When recess time came, she pulled me aside. She said, I'm going to add some dialogue just because I think, why did you mark white as your race? You're an Indian. I remember because that's what she said. Like, you aren't actually supposed to say that, but this is what she actually said to me. You're an Indian like me. You should be proud of who you are. I was shocked. Oops, typo. My mom and stepdad were white. I was white too, as far as I knew. And I told her so. She frowned and told me, go home and ask your mother. Okay, so rising action number 2. Yeah, I'm going to explain another thing. So I'm getting a little long here. You may not write quite this much, but this is actually a story I've wanted to tell for a while because I've been thinking about it a lot lately, I guess, with all the standardized testing and having a really diverse student body. I was like, I wonder if anything like this has ever happened to any of them. Okay, so I got to explain what happens next. So I went home and asked my mother, am I an Indian? Because that's what she called it back in the 80s. We didn't say Native American. So I want it to be like kind of obvious that it's back in the 80s. Am I an Indian? Mrs. Hayes says she thinks I am. My mother did not look happy. No, she said. You're white. Your real dad was something else. Tell her you're French Canadian, which, by the way, that's basically like Native American Métis people in Canada, but I didn't even find that out till I was like 30. Tell her you're French Canadian and not to ask again. I feel like I need a new paragraph. I've actually gone longer than a single paragraph, and I'm going to show you how I would split this up later when I finish my draft. So I'm probably writing a little more than you have to write, but I do want to let you see my process. Okay, so I'm going to keep going. The next day at school, I told Mrs. Hayes, my mom says I'm white. She says I'm French Canadian. Mrs. Hayes frowned again and shook her head. She looked disappointed. But I'll say, but never brought it up with me again. Okay, so now I feel like I'm getting to my climax. So the ultimate outcome of the conflict didn't come for like 20 more years. So the ultimate conflict was when I was about 30 years old. I mentioned to a colleague that I was French Canadian when she asked about my heritage. She said, oh, then you're Métis. I didn't realize until then that my mom was embarrassed by what do I want to say? Okay, so sometimes this happens when you write to you. Like, you got to come up with the right words. My, like, biology, ethnic background. I'll say biology. I can always change it, right? Notice it gave me some predictive text. I might have wanted to go with that. What were they telling me? Biological heritage. Oh, that's really good. Yeah, I'm going to go with that. Hit tab. Yeah. It was like slap in the face. I feel like that's a little bit of a cliche, and maybe I would want to revise that in a final copy. She realized she was ashamed of that part of me. And so my resolution is like what I learned about myself. I spent my whole childhood not looking like everyone else at my school. I never understood why I had olive skin and straight black hair. I wish, and so I think I'm going to talk about what I wish had happened. I wish my family had been able to help me learn about my father's culture. Okay, so what I'm going to do next is, congratulations, I've written my rough draft. Next, you need to go back and delete all the blue typing. And you're going to be left with just the black type that you wrote. And so then I'm going to organize it into a paragraph and proofread. So anything that's blue, I'm going to get rid of it. Boom, I'm getting rid of that. Boom, I'm getting rid of that. Boom, I'm getting rid of that. I'm going to maybe just keep saying boom because it makes me feel cool. Boom, no blue type there. Boom, no blue type there. This is actually a longer narrative than you guys are probably going to write. Sorry if I got a little wordy. Obviously, I didn't want the words type here. I'm going to go ahead and take all this out. And I think I can leave this part because it's going to help me proofread. So let's just look through, and I'm going to talk you through proofreading my work. Okay, first off, I can see there's something wrong. I think I need to get rid of the comma. Yeah, when I clicked on it, it auto-corrected for me. Let's just look for more squiggles to start. Okay, so what I would do next is I would figure out where I want my paragraphs to be. And so I'm going to go up here. And there's a couple of ways you can do paragraphs when you're writing, and I'm going to talk that over. I know the places where I want to do that again. I think this is how I want it. Some of these, well, actually this one should go with this paragraph. Okay, so sometimes teachers will say it's acceptable to make it look like this. See how each paragraph, there's just like a line in between, just a single line. Some people say that's okay, but that's not actually like terrific formatting. What you really want to do is eliminate the extra spaces in between. And see what I'm doing? I'm hitting tab at the start of each new paragraph. So actually mine's a little long. Yours may not be this long. Now, if I'm really doing academic formal writing, this even isn't quite formatted right. Let me show you how to do that. So if you ever have to do academic formal writing, I'm going to double check and make sure I have 12-point font. I would make sure I had 1-inch margins. I would make sure I used an appropriate font. Lexand Deca is actually a dyslexia-friendly font. I find that to be an acceptable academic font, maybe because of my background in special education. Like, I understand that just like Arial or Times New Roman, which are usually considered standard, this is very readable and looks professional, so I think it's okay. Next, I would change my line spacing to double space. And it would be looking terrific. Okay, so the next thing I would do that I'm not going to do with you is I would go through and I would read this out loud to myself, because honestly, you're going to catch more problems with your writing when you hear it read aloud. All right, so I'm not going to model through that step. You get the idea of what you're supposed to do. Happy writing.